Welcome back to the School PR Podcast, everyone. Hope your summer is getting off to a fantastic start. We are talking journalism today, the field of journalism and my career in journalism. I actually get interviewed by a student talking about all things journalism and how it led to my career in school PR.
Go. Be sure to visit soundmind.app, peachjar.com, and nicholsstrategies.com. Advocating for public education, sharing our stories, and celebrating our schools, students, and staff. From crisis communications to media relations, social media, and everything in between. We're here to give you the best strategies, tools, and techniques to help you help others. Welcome to the School PR Podcast, brought to you by Peach Jar, Sound Mind, and Nickel Strategies. Here's your hosts, Matthew Jennings and Ryan Ferran.
All right. Episode 112. Big thanks to Peach Jar and Nickel Strategies. We are talking about journalism, and that's where I started before getting into school PR. One of our students at the high school asked to do an interview with me. Not one of my interns, but Faith wanted to talk about journalism for her senior project that she was doing on the field. So I've done a few interviews over the past with students about journalism, school PR, media relations, and I did a couple a few years ago, and I was going to put them on the podcast. I ended up not. They were in the pandemic, and I thought I'd put this one on because Faith did such a good job, and I really enjoyed the conversation with her about journalism, and she asked some great questions. So I was a news reporter, did that for about 10 years, started in sports news and all that sort of thing. And we talk about ethics in journalism, why I think it's harder than ever now to be a journalist, and why I once told a boss I am never, ever doing that again. So touch on a few things, and it was kind of cool and how my career as a journalist led to what I'm doing now in education and school public relations and telling stories. I was once sitting in a newsroom, knew I was pretty much done in the field of journalism, but thought I have no idea what I am capable of doing and was kind of nervous about that. Luckily discovered school PR. So, and at the end of this, Faith did a really cool, her senior project was a video. It's a 10-minute video. So I was just a part of this interview as she was doing research. So I'm going to play her senior project for you, and you can hear the audio from her video that she did. She did a really good job talking about the field, what she discovered, and it's very insightful. So I wanted to play that for you, and I really compliment her on the job she did on the project and the interview. And so here is some of that. And please be sure to check out peachjar.com for all your flyer needs in your school district. They are great with iterations and making it super easy, one-touch approvals and PDF translators and all that. Super great. nicholstrategies.com. Check them out if you need help with whatever you're doing with communications, whether you have a full team, no team, you're a superintendent listening to this, but you want some help, you need some branding, increase enrollment, attracting staff, you need to pass a parcel text bond measure, Nickel Strategies has you covered. Episode 111 was really interesting, by the way. We talked with Furman Leal, who is on the cutting edge of AI in education. Great conversation because everyone was kind of into AI not too long ago and then kind of forgot about it, but kind of what's the latest advances with AI, the ethics and issues, and how frankly you can use it to help you in your position, whatever it may be. Episode 110, speaking of Nickel Strategies, we had Emily Popek on from Nickel Strategies, and there's a lot of new accessibility requirements that you need to know about. And that was very informative on episode 110. And then, there's just a lot of episodes that very relevant, hopefully, that you guys are into. NSPRA's coming up. I'll be at NSPRA. I'm doing a session on my internship program. We also have the National Internship Collab. So I'll be presenting on the final day of NSPRA on Wednesday, I believe it is. So if you're interested in internships or just want to stop by and say hello, please look us up. Please look me up. I'll be at NSPRA presenting in Seattle. Can't wait for that. And then I'll be up there too, hanging out with Matthew and the Peach Jar crew, doing some more podcast and talking to people. And I'm pretty sure Nicholas Strategies will be up there. So please check them out. If you can do me one favor, you don't have to subscribe. You don't have to like. You don't have to comment. Give us a review. I'm sure that gets a little tiring listening to all the podcasts. But if you could follow us on social media, that'd be great. We have a Facebook page, an Instagram, on X, and all that. So we would appreciate that. And without any further ado, after you go check us out on social media, give us a like. We do post clips there. Here is my conversation with Faith about journalism.
All right. So this is Faith Harnanto, and I'm here to interview Mr. Ryan Ferran. And this is for my journalism career project. So you can introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Ryan Ferran, Chief Communications Officer for the Arcadia Unified School District. Been here about 10 years now. Before this, I was in journalism, news reporter, did sports and news, and thrilled to be working in public education.
That's awesome. So how would you give a rundown of what journalism is about? So what's the responsibilities of a journalist?
Great question, because I feel like it has changed
Over time?
In recent years and over time. And the responsibility of a journalist from a true journalism perspective is to be objective, to be a fact finder, and share information to inform a community or the public without bias. So I think from a traditional, pure journalism perspective, that is the goal, is to gather information, share it with the public, and do so objectively.
Do you think journalists are counted to only one form of media, like just writing, or will they be able to choose if they want to do reporting or writing or anchoring, something like that?
Yeah, that's also evolved, the responsibilities of the journalist. Years ago, when times were a little bit better, I guess you could say, there was a lot more journalists that had specific skill sets, and they were in charge of one particular aspect. So you might have a videographer whose sole job was to record the video and then maybe edit it and put it together. And then you'd have the reporter that was doing the interviews, doing the research, doing the writing or the narration for the video or the story. Now, with budget cuts and media kind of consolidating a bit, I feel like a well-rounded journalist could do both those things and often has to do both those things. And then in addition to those jobs, and then has to write a different story for the website, be able to post online. So a really good journalist now, I think, is multifaceted and can do many, many different aspects of journalism. So I always encourage my students or people looking to get into journalism is don't limit yourself to one aspect of journalism. Even if you have a preference, which is great, we all kind of prefer one aspect, but learn all of them, know how they operate, and that will make you much more attractive to hire and much more valuable than just if you have one skill set.
I see. So is there a specific education needed, or is taking an English major sufficient enough to get into this career, or would a major in communications or journalism be more preferred?
That's a great question, and I feel like some students could be better suited if they major in the right area of expertise. For instance, I majored in broadcast journalism, my undergraduate, and then in my master's degree I got years later was in communications with an emphasis on new media and marketing. I feel like sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves too much. Even broadcast journalism might be a little too specific. Maybe I should have done something a little bit broader so I'd had more options. But with journalism, if you major in journalism, I feel like you still have a lot of options because you can go into obviously journalism, you can do broadcast, you can do print, and you could easily do public relations and probably marketing as well in those realms. So it opens you up. I see now a couple colleges marketing specifically sports journalism, and I think that may be a little bit of a mistake for some, depending on their career path, because I started in sports journalism, but I am nowhere near sports journalism now. So I went from sports journalism, then in years ago when we had a recession, I was basically forced into the newsroom to do general news reporting, which frightened me at the time, but was a great experience actually, and helped lead to my job in public relations now. So I feel like if you take something a little bit broader, you have more options, as opposed to if you're very specific and narrow in your major, then that may limit you for career options, especially even if you do say sports journalism for 5 years, but you realize, man, this is tough, I'm not making any money, I want to switch to communications or public relations. Will you have a major that allows for that flexibility? So that's what I think students should think about when selecting a major.
Would like a flat out English major be like too broad, or would that still be helpful?
I think that's a great question, and I'm glad you followed up with that, because English major, it's a different writing than what you're writing for print or broadcast. Broadcast writing is a much different style than print, and print is different than broadcast. And I think English writing essays and that is a lot different than both of those. So being a good writer is definitely going to help, and take all the English and writing classes you can. But an English major, I don't know how much journalism training you'll get as far as research, using cameras in studio stuff with camera equipment, audio equipment, podcasting. Will you get some of those experiences in an English major? Probably a lot less of them. Could you do it? For sure you could do it if you're motivated and you have other internships and things that are teaching you the other skills. But an English major as a whole, some programs may not be comprehensive enough to be hireable right out of college to walk into a newsroom and know everything what to do.
I guess taking the English major would help you with your own set of like writing, but it's not the complete, like the writing for like creatively and writing for facts and news articles is a different kind of skill.
And I do encourage the students though to take, especially in high school, don't be afraid to take another creative writing class, take another English class, because that will help you. Being a good writer will translate to journalism, and having that creative mind will definitely benefit you. But when you start getting into college and you need to narrow it a little bit, that's where you need to be a little bit more open-minded as to what you should take.
I see. Yeah, because lately I've been indulging a lot more in creative writing than other like DCI or the Quill. I think because I just got into it, I decided I wanted to be a writer like last year. So now in my senior year, I was trying to cram as much as I could. So so I took a creative writing class, and then I'm also like in a blog team for orchestra.
Oh, nice.
But if I had extra years, I would probably join DCI and try out the Quill to see how I fit with it. But I've never done so much journalism yet, so
Yeah, but it's smart. What you're doing, in addition to taking the classes, is, like you said, you're on the blog team for Orchestra. So that's fantastic, because you're going to get experience, you can write for them, you'll learn how to publish to a blog, how to promote the blog. So doing things on your own, if I saw your resume and maybe somebody else specifically majored in journalism or taken more journalism classes, but I see on the side, on your own time, you're so passionate enough to do this sort of thing, that would stand out to me and say, oh, this person is very ambitious, and let's have some faith in faith.
All right. So, what's like a normal day for a journalist? Is it a lot of different tasks? Like, does it depend on the day? Is it not the same every day?
Good question. Some days, I guess the format of the day could be similar. For me in TV news, depending on your shift, you usually go in, the start of your shift, you'll have a meeting with the producers, the assignment editors, other reporters, and you kind of talk about what are we thinking today? What are the story ideas? And you pitch your story. So sometimes it's going to be obvious. There's a fire over in the mountains, and we're all going to cover that. You don't need to meet, all hands on deck for that. Other times it's what they would call a slower news day, and we need to, like, what are we going to cover? What's going to be a good story? Have you gotten any press release? Do you have any leads? And that's where I tell my interns and journalism students, that's where a lot of value is. If you have a creative mind and can bring story ideas to the table, that is really helpful. Sometimes you'll have journalists just sitting at the table and their ideas just come from a press release or a story another station did or a story they saw in the newspaper. Oh, we can convert this to TV. Okay, some of those stories may be interesting, but can you bring something unique that our viewers have never seen before? Can you teach our viewers something they didn't know before? So I think that's where you bring a lot of value. So anyway, back to your question. You'll start with a morning meeting. You'll decide what you're going to cover that day, and then you maybe you'll make some calls to follow up and see if, can we get this interview with the mayor? We want to do a story on water pollution in the city or something like that. But do we have the people to talk to? Is it worth pursuing? Do we have those interviews? So then you'll kind of start making those calls, doing the research, and then it's off to your story. And for TV news, the turnaround time is fast, because when you go in and a few hours later, you're expected to have something on the air. So that's where it's tough, because the turnaround time is so short. You need to get all the facts, be accurate, talk to people, and then present it for on air. So you got to do the video editing, the narration, and get it nice and pretty to present to the public.
So I never realized how many people work together for one project. I always thought it was like they assign you to do one thing and then you do that project on your own and then you give it to them. But it's a lot of community and working together, which I never realized.
Yeah, and you do a lot of work independently, but you kind of storyboard together, and then you'll write, even if you go in Apache News, you'll see they have their stories for the week on the board. They'll tell you, okay, is this story just going to be a quick soundbite, or is this going to be a longer developed package? Is this just going to be anchor narration with a graphic? And so you kind of all work together to figure out what's the best format for the story. And then sometimes you go, once they say, okay, Faith, you're going to cover the cross-country race, and so you may go off by yourself, or maybe you'll get a photographer, then you two will work together. So you got to be a team player, but also have the ability to work independently.
Okay. And then earlier you mentioned, when you have your team meetings, this was actually one of my questions, when you work for a certain company or news company, do you have to adhere to topics they give you, or do you create those ideas and create your own projects? Which I guess you kind of answered earlier. So
it's a good question, though, because you kind of do both. Sometimes they'll give you, okay, we need to cover the story, go cover this, here's who to talk to. Other times they're looking, okay, do you have anything? So I think it's a combination of both. And sometimes you just get assigned stories. You walk in and here's your story today. They already decided that at the morning meeting. We need to cover this. There's a meeting at 5 o'clock. So when the afternoon shift gets in, Ryan will cover it, so-and-so. So it's a hybrid of both. But again, the valuable reporters are the ones, they bring a lot of story ideas to the table. And so you're not always just relying on press releases or what another reporter at another outlet did. So yeah, it's a combination.
I see that. Okay, so switching gears, what do you like most about your job?
My current job, or when I was a journalist?
I guess when you were a journalist.
You got to meet so many different people that you would have never had the opportunity to meet. For me, starting out in sports reporting, I covered mostly high school athletes and college athletics, depending on where I was working. But we also had the opportunity to cover professional sports, and so I got to interview people like Kobe Bryant and some of the Dodgers players and people that I wouldn't I'd have had no business having access to the locker room or being courtside or on the sidelines of an NFL game. So that was fun and exciting, and even silly stories on the morning show when I was in Tucson. They had the monster truck rallies or the coming to town, so you got to go see the huge trucks, talk to the drivers, and then even just small mom and pops doing volunteer work, and you just got to meet so many different people that you would have never had the opportunity to talk to if you weren't a journalist. So I think you learn so much, you meet so many people, and you really kind of expand your education and just the people that you get to meet. So I think that's one of the best parts of the job.
Ooh, would you say that's also the most fulfilling?
Yeah, and when you do stories that make an impact, I remember covering some fires and people, had their houses burned down, and you get to help the public during the fires, the wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's where the shelters are. Here's where the police are saying the evacuation zones are. So if you live in this area, you need to, and here's the Red Cross shelter where you can, if you don't have food or you don't have shelter, here's where you can go. So as journalists, when you make an impact and you help somebody, that feels good and rewarding, like, I'm making a difference in the world.
Yeah.
I'm helping somebody. So that was always really rewarding. And then, or telling somebody's story that has overcome, difficult circumstances and shining a spotlight on them, and maybe you inspire others to donate to that cause or that charity. So journalists, the power of the pen is the cliche, and there is a lot of power in that you reach so many people through your platforms, and you as a reporter have an opportunity through good storytelling to make an impact, and that's really rewarding.
That's so awesome. You get to you get to experience more life by being out there, and then you also get to share that with the people, your audience.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is a 180. What do you like the least about journalism?
Yeah, it's tough because sometimes you mentioned it earlier about how much choice you have in what you cover versus what you're kind of told to cover. And so sometimes you're told to cover things that you may not necessarily agree with. And over, 20 something years ago, there was the advent of cable news where it became much more biased, but people, were eating that up. They were selling ads, so it was very profitable. And so, but for years that was just at the cable news network, and it was, after a while anyway, it was very apparent that this is not objective journalism. This is more subjective and kind of pictured as legit journalism, but I think people understood this is not, journalism. But then you start to see it creep into maybe some local news, newspapers, and so it becomes more difficult to determine what's objective, what's subjective, what's trying to look objective but it's clearly not, what's the agenda, is it political? So I have a saying, cause over craft, where people will put their individual causes, or maybe it's a media outlet, their cause over the craft of journalism. And that's where it gets very
Lopsided.
Yes, and gray area, and where you don't, as a journalist, it becomes very difficult to maintain your level of standards, professionalism, and being objective when you're told you've got to cover this, or be sure to report on this candidate. And usually when we're doing, whether it's local races or whatever, if you get a soundbite with one candidate, you should always get one with another. They should be very fair. They should be about similar length in time. But with cause over craft, you're seeing that being slanted a little bit. And so that's where I feel like journalists now have it very difficult, because they're getting pressure from maybe their company or their boss to report a certain way on a certain topic. And that's where you're kind of like, oh, this is not what I signed up for. And you got to question. And so that becomes difficult. I remember I covered a story years ago, and it wasn't political, but it was this major solar project they wanted done. I came in on the afternoon shift, and a photographer, videographer went out, did some interviews, and they wanted me to come in, log it, and then put together the story. But there was an environmental impact report that was kind of at the core of the issue that was being questioned. It was millions of dollars, and they wanted me to put this together in like 90 minutes. And I was logging through it. There were some questions that weren't asked that I would have asked, to be fair to both sides. And I went into my news director at the time and said, I can't do this. There's questions I still have, and there's information we're missing. And he kind of wanted me to do it anyway. And so we pared down the story a lot. It was going to be a bigger story. I said, it's just not right to do, but he wanted me to get it done. I went back and forth and said, I'm going to go out there and say, we talked to so-and-so, and I didn't talk to them. It was the videographer that did this. And so I'm putting my face to the story, like I've done the research, and I came in 90 minutes and logged this stuff, and you want it on the air at 5 o'clock. So that drove me kind of nuts, and to a point. And that was, it seems maybe low level, but for people that were investing in this project, there's millions of dollars at stake, and I don't want to be the person putting out misinformation because I don't have time to fact check, follow up with somebody. So that annoyed me a lot. And that used to happen a lot, and it probably still does, where somebody collects some of the story, then somebody else picks it up. And it's like the telephone game, something could get lost. So I told them, I'll pare this down this time, but I'm never doing that again. If you want a story reported from me, I need to do the reporting. And so you can imagine if it's a different scenario, if it was a story about gas prices going up and a videographer went down there and just interviewed a few people, that's kind of easy. I can piece that together. I don't need to, it's not a very deep story where you need to do a deep dive. It's pretty simple. We just want reaction. I can do that. But something that's millions of dollars, people's livelihood, there's like farmland on the line about where they could do boundaries. So that's where it becomes tough for a journalist to answer some of those questions. And should I be doing this? And is this ethical?
Do you think, like, for some companies to have bias, do you think that's mainly from the company's point of view and what they're letting out? Or is it from individual journalists and what they're, I guess, taking in?
Yeah, I think it could be from both, just depending on the situation. I'm sure it's happened from both. So sometimes it's just maybe a manager's perspective or their preference, or maybe that's kind of from top down, like here's kind of our philosophy on this story and this is how we're going to kind of report that. So it could be a little bit of both.
So for when a journalist makes their article and their project, do other people edit it, like look through it and edit it before it goes onto the air? Or is it like self-made?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes at some stations that'll happen. At newspapers, that happens a lot with editors. And you have a little bit more time. With TV, I would say sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, because especially if I'm doing breaking news and I'm talking to somebody, we don't have time for somebody to review it. And so it's kind of the trust of the reporter and whoever, if there's a videographer, photographer on it, to do it. So yes, not everything gets looked over with a second set of eyes, but that's where you hope the journalist is trained well and everyone else does their job, and you should be okay. But yeah, sometimes it's you're trusting one person.
I guess tying into that, is an editor or considered a journalist, or is that a completely different career?
Great question. I would say depending on their training. And that's sometimes, so most of the videographers I work with, I would say, did not go to school for journalism, and they weren't taught in that traditional way, but they may have had training in photography specifically, but they were, especially in cutbacks, they would be doing a lot of journalism work. They're doing interviews, they're talking to people, because sometimes you would have to split people up. He's going to get that story, you got to get this story. So, and a lot of them are really good at it, and they've been working for years, they've heard the questions, they're just smart people, they know what good journalism is, but sometimes you're starting out and maybe that's not in their wheelhouse, so it could be tougher, but you will see a little bit of both. But I feel like typically it's kind of a different route that some may go on. But there's a lot of journalism programs that'll teach you behind the camera sort of stuff. So it just kind of depends on your background and education.
Okay. So what would you say is the least fulfilling thing about the job? Or what has been the least fulfilling?
It gets, when you do it for a long time and you realize sometimes what kind of sells out there in the world, and any consumer can tell you, a lot of the times it's the negativity. You know, you're not leading the newscast with the feel-good story, you're leading it with the murder, mayhem, and the politics that are getting ugly. So that tends to wear on you, and you're covering breaking news because it's crime, but it's because people watch. In Los Angeles area, we get a lot of car chases, and we get what the latest crime is or shooting, and after a while you're like, that's what your daily life is covering the negative aspects of society and your community, and that takes a toll on you, because who wants to live in that nonstop? It's, you know, kind of like the emergency room doctor or the emergency room nurse. It's tough for them because they see the worst of the worst every day. So you kind of get jaded to it almost, but I don't think it's great for your mental health, your well-being, and that's the tough part. You do get to do positive stories and those uplifting ones, but when you watch a newscast and if you analyze it, how many stories are negative versus how many are positive, and even when the weather goes bad, we're not talking about the community that's dry, the sewers are working great, and everyone's great. What are we doing? We're going to the mudslides, we're going to where the tree fell over, took out the car, into the house. So the lens tends to be negative because people will watch negative because they're trying to protect themselves, they're scared. And so that's what becomes the difficult part for a journalist, is dealing with, I'd rather talk to somebody who's doing well or is helping somebody, as opposed to the devastation of the storm. So that, I think it's very tough for journalists.
Do you think that's been the main focus, like, over the years, or has that been, like, it's starting to turn more negative as, like, time goes on?
I think that's always kind of been the focus. I think people realize more recently that that's where the money is. And if you even just take news stories that you see on social media, you'll see, you know, it's often, the term is clickbait. They'll give you the horrifying headline because you click it so they get money. You see more clicks, viewers, and actions on the negative. But 20 years ago, the reporter would go out in the middle of the storm too, as opposed to the town, you know, 2 hours away, which is dry and sunny. So I think we've done it for years. I think it's been exacerbated a bit recently for financial motivations, but I think that's always kind of been there, and that's kind of human nature. We pay, you know, if you think about your own psychology and your own thoughts, you can usually remember more negatives, the shot you missed, you know, that bugs you for 20 years later more than the one you made. So it's kind of inherently within everybody, and especially journalists.
So adding on to that, from what's happened from the past and the future, do you think this job will, like, have any different future change?
In education, we often talk about the pendulum swinging, and even with certain things, I think media, there's been a lot of questions about trust, being objective over the past several years. And so I think people may be wanting to get back to that traditional, just give me the facts, do the research, and let me decide. I don't want your slant. So it may come back to people just want objective journalism. I would hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah, it would be great. Unfortunately, though, we see with cable news, when somebody is talking to your views, your lens, people enjoy absorbing that because it kind of reinforces their thoughts. So I think they'll always have the subjective, but I think because of some frustrations, you may see a little bit swing back to objective media, and here's a place where you can get it. We're not biased, we don't have an agenda, and I think there's an audience for that for sure.
Yeah. I would be one of them too.
Yes,
Because
absolutely, me
like
too.
lately it feels like everyone's trying to be a journalist. Like everyone thinks they're right and they just spew out facts. And everyone trusts like getting
Yeah.
information from everyone, even if it's misleading.
And now because of technology and social media, everyone can play journalist on their social media channel. And you don't need to be a reporter at ABC7
Yeah.
anymore. You can just hop on your TikTok, your Instagram, do a live video and report on whatever you want. So
Yeah.
that's where it becomes hard. But as consumers, you need to be vigilant about what you're consuming and hopefully do some fact checking independently.
Of course. So another hot topic lately is like the rise of AI. So I think with some creative writers, their careers are somewhat like in danger for like, is this person's writing actually real or is it AI?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that would ever affect like the journalism world?
I think so, because we've seen stories, big journalists at big newspapers that were covering things where they weren't really at.
Ooh.
And there were some big scandals of, people kind of plagiarizing from others, saying they were at the courthouse and they weren't. So there's always that temptation to get more out of doing a lot less. So I think that will be a big issue, if not already, that journalists are facing with AI as far as credibility, because I'm sure you've played with some AI, it is incredible what it can do.
It's scary.
And it can write a great story. It can write a book for us, and so I do think that is a great concern of ethics within journalism, and should any AI be used? How transparent? So that I think is AI will have a huge impact. And I saw something recently where there's just an AI news where they're having reporters that are AI themselves. They look like actual reporters, but it's not, and they're talking scripts. So it's already there.
But I feel like that would be difficult now because if something is like a current event is happening, like where do they get that information from?
Yeah, I mean with AI though, and it's brain power. It feels like it's unlimited where they could get information from, and so yeah, that's going to be a tough obstacle for journalism and newsrooms on how to tackle the AI issue.
Okay, so wrapping this up a little bit. So for you personally, why did you pursue journalism?
I always played sports growing up. In college, I found myself watching the local news on occasion, which most 19, 20-year-old people don't watch the local news. It's a much older demographic. And I was working at a restaurant, Chuck's of Hawaii in Santa Barbara, and this girl, Jill Cogswell at the time, her maiden name, asked me to fill in for her on the weekend. I forget what day it was. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll take your shift for you. I said, why? What are you doing? And she goes, oh, I have I'm making my resume tape at the TV station. I have an internship there. And I was like, wait, what? Tell me this. She's like, yeah, I have an intern at the local ABC affiliate here, and they're letting me do like a resume demo in the studio. And I was fascinated with that, blown away, because I watched the local news. I thought it was cool, but I had no concept that I could ever be on the news or be a reporter. For some reason, I never made that connection. Then I'm talking to Jill, who's saying, yeah, I've done that. And so that opened up my whole world. And I asked her, like, how do I do this? And she told me, yeah, go down there. And so I forgot exactly how I did it, but I went down there like almost immediately, a few days afterwards, inquired about an internship, got an internship, was super excited. So I was doing the internship for a few months, and they offered me a small part-time job as assignment editor, and was doing that. Then their sports department, they allow some interns to be on air if you do enough and you cover the local football. So I did the intern with the sports department too, got on air, and then I started building my resume tape from there. And then I got my first full-time job in Eureka from my internship in Santa Barbara. So that's kind of how it randomly happened.
Yeah, I've kind of felt that way too. Like been fascinated by like all your interns like doing, like being out there and going to other places in the district and covering stories, and that seems really cool to me.
Why didn't you not join, Faith?
I was
What the
not.
heck? We could have
I
used you. You
know.
could have used your mind.
I wish I was like 2 years younger right now.
Yes. But that's why I created the internship. Well, there's many reasons for it, but one of the reasons was just to give students an opportunity, and at such a young age, because I didn't realize I wanted to do this till, into college, a couple years into college, 1 or 2 years into college. And I even remember taking a video production class in high school, but I just kind of took it. I wasn't that interested in it. I kind of honestly took it for the easy A. That was the reputation of the class. But knowing what I knew after that, I was like, man, I would be so much further ahead if I would have really worked hard in that class, paid attention, took the advanced class. So the internship really allows students at such a young age, because I'll take even freshmen, to start doing what we do as journalists. And I really teach them at a professional level, not even a high school level. It's like, this is advanced techniques. And when I critique you, I'm not critiquing you as a freshman in high school. I'm critiquing you if we're in the newsroom at ABC 7. So like, this is the expectations. And we're much more lenient because we know everyone's new and we're learning. But I really try and expose them to the newsroom setting. This is professional standards, and these are the techniques. So I think they appreciate it, and they get a lot out of it, and a lot of them go on to major in it, and now we have some working in the field, which is very fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this is a question I just thought of on the spot, but do journalists ever get block, like writer's block? Because I feel like for me as a creative writer, sometimes I'll get like block or creative block, and then I feel like I'm stuck. But for journalists, if they have a topic that they already have, do they experience block?
I definitely have for sure, and you need some inspiration. So maybe you'll take a break because you're trying so hard. But yeah, I know I definitely do. I think others do, and I think it's fine. Like, okay, I know I'm going to face a block. How do I get out of it? And the last time I had a writer's block, what did I do? How did I get out of it? Maybe it was you just zoned out on TV, you read a book, you did some more research on what it was, but it definitely happens. And that's one of the tough aspects of journalism is writer's block, or how do I still remain creative if I've been doing this for 5-10 years? Like, how do I still tell intriguing stories that are going to educate people, maybe be a little entertaining, and how do you still have that passion to do that? So it's a good question that a good journalist knows how to navigate, and that's how they kind of set themselves apart, by continuing to put out fun, creative stories.
Because do journalists, well, I think this is a question for all writers, should they adhere to one specific voice, or should they like try like branching out to different styles of like how you want to convey your like words?
I think try different styles, see what you like, be yourself. Don't try to, you can get inspiration from Hemingway or whatever great writer you want, but don't try and mimic them, because you want people, later on mimicking you. And so inspiration is great, but I feel like being yourself, having your own voice is what makes unique. With my interns, they love getting inspired about other trends. Even if we're talking about TikTok videos or what should we do, they love pointing to what others have done. And I'm putting my head through a wall saying, guys, we need to do some unique and creative ideas. That's where the value is. So your voice may be different and never been done before, but that's what makes it valuable. If you're doing what everyone does before, I understand it, people do it, and that's what gets views, whether it's reads on articles or views on videos. There's formulas that work, but when you become special and unique and viral, it's because it's never been done. It is truly unique. So I always appreciate people that are a little bit different, they think different, they are willing to take a risk and try something different, because you can have a successful career doing a formula that others have done, but if you want to make a true impact, change the world, you will be a unique individual. If you're doing what somebody else did, you're just not going to stand out. And so, no judgment, but I really appreciate people that are creative thinkers. They'll take a little bit of a risk and be as unique as possible.
All right. I think that's all the questions I have.
Great job. And one thing I liked about you as a journalist, you had some questions that you wanted to ask, but you also paid attention to what I was saying. So you had follow-up questions, other things sparked different questions. So you're not just reading a list of questions and getting through them. You're thinking as the conversation, as you're doing the interview. So I think that is a very good skill.
This was like one of my first times having an interviewer, being the interviewer. So, yeah.
Well, you're a natural.
Woohoo.
You should have been. My only regret is that you weren't in DCI.
Yeah. I wish I got into this sooner, because all I've been seeing for me as a writer has just been a creative writer. But yeah.
And so my transition from journalism to public relations, I'm still a storyteller, I'm still a writer, I still do all those journalistic techniques and strategies that I've learned, but now I'm just doing it for one entity, for the school district, instead of the general news. So I feel like journalism is a great career and a great start, and if you find like, oh, I want something challenging or different, you can go into public relations, you can go into marketing, because you're still a storyteller.
Yeah.
You're just a little bit more focused in this particular area for a particular organization. So that's what I do like about journalism. I remember having the thought sitting in the newsroom years ago where I was kind of burnt out with journalism, but I didn't think I said, what else am I going to do? I don't know anything else. I don't have any other skills. But what I didn't realize is that those journalism skills transfer to a lot of other fields. And so when I found public relations, I was thrilled, because it's a perfect fit for me. I get to be in education, which I love, work with great people for a great cause. You're helping students, you're helping a community, and I'm still a storyteller, so I still get to use those. So I feel like that's really, I found the perfect fit. But if I didn't have journalism first and that storytelling ability, I wouldn't be a good fit in PR. But it worked perfect for me.
Yeah. I think creative writing for me has been good for me to just be a writer, but I think journalism is another way to like gain your confidence and be more confident in what you're putting out.
Yeah. And I always tell my students, speech and debate is always a good one to take. Patchy news, even theater, but things that put you up in front of people, whether you're going into journalism or not, it's going to help you in whatever field. You want to get over that kind of hurdle of fear of public speaking, but anything you can do to just put yourself out there, talk to people that you wouldn't normally talk to, is a great idea, just to help, because even if you're an accountant or something, you're still going to have to do a presentation for, your office or something like that. So those skills, all these skills, whether you stick with journalism for 50 years or 5 months, they're going to help you in other areas of life, which I think is very valuable.
All right. Yeah. I think that's
all right.
All of it.
Great job.
That was great. That was very insightful. Hello, my name is Faith Harnanto, and this is my senior project about the career of a journalist. My initial impressions about this job were quite narrow. I thought that journalists were strictly people who write articles in offices, while reporters were the ones who cover broadcast media. I've been more of a creative writer than an article writer, so I've also seen this profession as a write for a purpose job instead of a write for fun job, like a career as an author. Overall, I thought journalists would be good time managers who can write professionally under strict time crunches. The public perception of journalism has been quite negative. According to a survey conducted in 2020, US adults have expressed more negative thoughts about the journalism career than positive ones. The only factor here that was a little more positive was that they think journalists care about how good of a job they do. Otherwise, they seem to not be professional, hurt the views and democracy of America, and not care about the people they report on. That last point especially shocked me the most, and I will delve into my thoughts about that as I go on. So, being a journalist is actually not one specific job. Journalists have many different career paths, including editors, reporters, correspondents, broadcast journalists, photojournalists, and even cartoonists. And each of those careers can specialize in a different subject area, from politics and economics to sports and fashion. But they all have one mission. I interviewed AOSD's Chief Communications Officer Ryan Ferran, who said being a journalist is to be objective, to be a fact finder, and share information to inform a community or the public without bias. The everyday tasks of a journalist is to research, write, edit, and file news stories, features, or articles. This comes with quite a few pros. You get to meet people who you may never get to meet. Allowing yourself to be behind the scenes of events in everyday life can feel very insightful and allow you to gain a new appreciation for things. In Lillian Ross's book about her notes on her life as a journalist, she states that she chooses to write about the people, situations, and events that appeal to her. Fame or sensationalism were never appealing. In fact, they were deadening. Going back to that chart, and seeing the assumption that journalists don't actually connect with the people they interview, it's quite heartbreaking. Ross continues, journalists have a responsibility to their clients. It's not to rewrite their story, but to fully encapsulate it, just as they hear it from their words. It is obvious that a dedicated journalist cares deeply about the people and events they write about. Ross also compares reporting to writing a story or a film. Scene building is even important in article writing, and you should still be able to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. This aspect excited me the most, especially because of how I've always liked creative writing. The skills in that area can still be used within journalism, just with writing about real events. Despite the upsides, there are still some cons that come with journalism. This career definitely pushes people to their limits. It's very fast-paced, and the pressure on deadlines can be very stressful. The career is ever-changing, especially with today's digital age. But someone who's truly passionate about regular challenges and taking in new information can find this job continuously satisfying. Unfortunately, people can also misinterpret your work and put labels on you as a reporter or on your company. Newspaper reporter Annie Scholl says that even after 3.5 decades of being a writer, criticism can still sting. But instead of thinking about ego, thinking about the career as a service is a good way to combat it. This career really isn't about the fame of being in front of the camera. It's about sharing things that people need to hear. You'll need to have some mighty thick skin in order to get through the criticism. Another thing is that stories surrounding negative events have been getting more views or reads than a lighthearted one. I personally liked the way Mr. Ferran portrayed this. For something even as simple as the weather, the stories are barely ever about the dry community where everything is clear or fair. The stories are covering the devastating floods, the mudslides, and where trees are falling on top of people's houses. But the reason as to why people give so much attention to these heartbreaking stories is because people want to know how to be safe and how to protect themselves, and journalists can help with that, making an impact by offering the public different ways to stay safe or to even promote a charity. This can be fulfilling and shed some light amongst the constant negativity. Journalism can come from all sorts of backgrounds, and the perks of this career is that it can use skills that were learned in previous jobs. Senior editor Fiona Kelly, who works for the National and Dutch Entertainment News, reveals that she's worked with people who have been training since high school, but has also worked with someone who joined her team right after working as a tram driver. She explains that the one thing that connected them all was a willingness to learn and adapt. But of course, having some experience in a college or high school newspaper, yearbook, or internship can definitely help a journalist's resume look much more impressive. Journalism is all about writing and communication, so English skills are the definite backbone for this job. The market expects a minimum 4-year bachelor's degree in journalism, but that doesn't mean to only stack your courses with media experience. Creative writing classes are just as important, and it can help build your writing style and portray your stories in a more enhanced way. Depending on the subjects that you focus on, every other course can also be just as helpful, like business, finance, and even STEM classes. Again, the areas that journalism covers is just as broad as it gets, so as long as you have the skills to write and proofread, you can write about anything you're passionate about. The salaries differ based on the type of journalism career. Reporters, correspondents, and broadcast journalists have an hourly pay of $20.93 per hour, and their annual salary falls between $50,000 to $80,000 a year. Their projected growth rate between 2018 to 2028 shows a 10% decline, which is quite concerning. On the other hand, proofreaders and editors have a slightly higher salary. Their hourly pay is $29.50 per hour, showing an 8% decline. The job barely provides a living wage with all the factors considered. It really depends on how many people you need to support in your household. Unfortunately, with a declining market, the job numbers have declined by nearly 50% between 2005 to 2017. Major journalism companies in Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and DC hold half of all the journalism jobs in America, but you can still find big media companies everywhere around the world. There are options for travel and career advancement, but not so much for schedule flexibility and offered dependent care. Correspondents and reporters often have to travel for on-site reporting and writing. Sometimes the host will cover the travel costs, but there are also times where reporters will have to pay out of pocket. Usually, through smart planning and networking, the travel costs should not outweigh the profits from the articles. Major journalism companies have many roles for their employees, so career advancement is also very likely the longer you work in the profession, like being promoted to an editor or a manager. For their schedule, journalists work full-time, but because of spontaneous or unpredictable events, overtime or even weekend hours are not unusual. This career can definitely change in the next 20 years, or maybe even the next 5. With the shift of shortening attention spans, technology and social media has made it so that anyone can play as a journalist on their Instagram or TikTok, which may ultimately be the regular medium. But even audiences know that some of the information from these sources may not be that reliable. Mr. Ferran mentions that the pendulum could be swinging again, and that sooner or later people may just want the facts. No slant, just straight up objective journalism. I also didn't really think that AI could take over journalism, because for a career that deals with literal current events, how could a robot interview a person about something that just happened? But my assumptions will probably be proven wrong. AI has still been used as a tool to write, and its fast-evolving writing skills can be dangerous for the declining job market. Reflecting on my research, I find that being a journalist is a much broader career than I initially thought. And while working on this project, I realized that I've already been going through the motions of a reporter-journalist. I found information through interviews, gathered facts, then conveyed it to the public, or in this case, my AP Literature class. Reading and listening to testimonies from reporters has definitely excited me to pursue journalism, especially when I can use some of my creative writing skills to help. But the declining market is what's concerning me the most. If I'm lucky enough to land a good position, I think the experience will be fulfilling and worth it.